B'nai Matov, Umanayim, Shevet Achim Gam Yachad. Those are very simple words from Psalm 133. And they are happy words, how good and how pleasant it is that we have this opportunity as fellows to sit together. And it is absolutely incredible that we are gathered here on this place, on this afternoon, and it should make us all smile. There are folks from so many different communities here that are here to do this act of memory. In our very fragmented and broken world, think about all of the difference. I know I have seen people from UU and Community Church, from the Center for Spiritual Care in Indian River Clay. I have people who have given me eggs from their garden and brought sourdough starter for me to bake with. We have children from our religious school. There are neighbors of members of our congregation. We have Boy Scouts here. We have the mayor of Vero Beach here. We have so many people from different communities here to do this act of memory, to acknowledge the Holocaust, to say what do we learn from it in our day and age, and to do the work that we have to do so that we never forget and we never see that horror again. So here we are in this place. I'm Rabbi Michael Bernholtz. I'm from Temple Beth Shalom. And how wonderful it is that we had to take a couple of extra minutes to open up the doors into our religious school hall so that we could have more seats for more people here in this place. Just so everybody knows, our plan is to be in this room for about an hour. We have two extraordinary people coming to share their stories. They're only a little less nervous than bar and bat mitzvah kids. Is that fair to say? I have offered them pomegranate puckers by way of bribery, and they have graciously accepted. We are going to be in here an hour. We're going to hear from Clara, and we're going to hear from Susan, and then we are going to have a short service of memory here in our sanctuary, and then we are going to walk outside. We're just going to walk, and it'll be a walk in silence, and we will go over to the garden where our Butterfly of Hope sculpture is. It is truly an amazing sculpture, and you have to realize how that sculpture got here. Shanti Sanchez was one of the coordinators for our Community One initiative for Holocaust education that is connected to our Temple Beth Shalom Foundation. And she said, wouldn't it be awesome hearing some of the stories from Amy and Wayne Gould, who are members of our congregation? Wouldn't it be awesome if we could do the Butterfly Project here? And so she started to work on this, and I said, hey, wait a second, I know people at Indian River Clay. And Glenda Taylor is here, and the Indian River Clay stepped forward. They did a whole workshop with us, a whole group of educators from the community, to make casts of these butterflies and to learn how to do them from scratch. And then as I was working with Shanti, Glenda said, can we do it at the temple? Would you like that? She brought all of the clay and the materials with her. It's incredible how much clay stuff you can pack into the back of a car. And then she came back, I don't remember if it was a week or a month later, and brought all of the supplies. She had fired all over 100 butterflies for us, and then took and gave us the opportunity to glaze them, and took them back and fired them again, and brought them that we have them. And I reached out to one of our young people. He's not so young anymore, he's in his 30s, Gabriel Kaplan. And he came, and he's a metal worker, and he had started to experiment with sculptures, and we came up with an idea for this tree. And we knew the tree needed to sit on something, and Richard Bialowski, one of our members, is a brilliant architect and designer, and came up with a base. But Richard and I said, we're not doing this. And lo and behold, one of our young people, Bryson Valley, did this as his Eagle Scout project. From the ground, below the ground up, with one of his friends, Nathaniel from the troop, and with lots of help from his family, and as you can see on the program, lots of other organizations who stepped up to provide the resources and the funding to make all of this happen. It is truly something woven together as a labor of love by so many people. And so here we are. to tell some of the story of the Butterfly Project, to hear from Clara, to hear from Susan. I'm going to call forward just in a second Sam Block, who oversees the Community One initiative as part of our Temple Beth Shalom Foundation. And the reason he is here is because Hannah Daniel is not able to be here. Hannah has avoided COVID for 3 years until today. And she is watching on Zoom, and if I had my camera on, you all could wave, but I'm waving for you. They're all waving, Hannah, and sending lots of blessings of healing to her as she is dealing with something that so many of us had, and we hope she heals very easily and quickly. But as we are here, I welcome forward Sam Block, who's really a founder. We wouldn't be in this building if it wasn't for Sam, for his parents, and for his brother, and for his whole family. They were the seeds in the beginning of Temple Beth Shalom, and I hope they realize how moved we are, incredible it is that here we are 40 years after the founding of Temple Beth Shalom, that we get to fill this sanctuary in this way. So I welcome forward Sam Block to share a little bit about the Community One initiative.
Good afternoon. Rabbis talk about the Butterfly Project and Community One Initiative. These are projects that are being sponsored by the Temple's Foundation, and we have several of them that we take into the schools and we take into the community about Holocaust education, and it's important to us that people remember. We have a education, we call the education coordinator, and as you heard, Hannah cannot be here today because of her sickness with her family, and she sent a very insightful, and I'm going to read, and she asked me to read this to you today. What is the Butterfly Project? And those of you that are close to it, as the rabbi has spoken, we all say, oh, this is part of our life now. But you that are out here, it's just fascinating to read this. And I will, we are here today to talk to you about a very meaningful initiative, the Butterfly Project. This project is more than just an art installation or a unique exhibit. It is a tribute to 1.5 million children that were murdered. As we say died, the rabbi says murdered in the Holocaust. 1.5 million children that were murdered. A message of hope for those still fighting for freedom, and a call to action to young people today to stand up against intolerance and hatred. The Butterfly Project is a global education and arts initiative that teaches about the Holocaust through the painting and display of ceramic butterflies, with a goal of creating a butterfly for each of the 1,500,000 children that died. Through this project, everyone has the opportunity to learn about the Holocaust and the devastating impact it had on millions of people. The project was inspired by a poem called The Butterfly, written by Pavel Friedman, a young boy who was imprisoned in many concentration camps and eventually died in Terezin concentration camp in World War II. This project aims to inspire people to take action in response to hate, bigotry, and prejudice. It accomplishes this through hands-on educational workshops that involve the creation of ceramic butterflies. By painting butterflies, students are able to create a lasting symbol of remembrance and hope. These butterflies are then displayed in exhibits, reminding us that even in darkness, there is always a chance for beauty and growth. We are proud of the enthusiastic support of this project here in our own community. We have been working to bring the Butterfly Project not just to our religious school, but as the rabbi said, but to elementary schools in our district as well. Our goal is to educate and inspire young people and people of all ages to become advocates of tolerance, compassion, and respect for all peoples, regardless of race, religion, or background. It is our responsibility to remember the past and endure the future generations, learn and grow from it. I will tell you that worldwide, there are presently 375,000 butterflies that have already been produced. And we're part of that project. This community should be very proud of what we do. And we thank you very much for coming today and be part of this. Rabbi.
And as we prepare for our speakers to come up, and we're going to be sitting up here having a conversation with each other so they have the chance to share their story. I just want to be clear, when I say thank you, and there's the story of Jacob when he's wandering the wilderness and heading to Haran, and he goes to sleep for the night, and he has a dream, and this is an incredible dream of God and the stairway to heaven with angels going up and angels going down, and he wakes up and he says, how awesome this place, God is in this place and I didn't know it. That expression of awe, I didn't even realize what I was receiving. I just want to make sure when I talk about Glenda, when I talk about Bryson, when I talk about Gabe, when I talk about all of the people who've been involved in this project, it's like that kind of awe that people are able to do that and give of themselves in such incredible ways with so much ruach and koach, spirit and strength. What you have done has enabled this to happen, and what we are doing is incredible. I know there are also folks from Community Church here. They actually did the Butterfly Project in their Vacation Bible School next year. We also had Willow School just up the road that did it in their school. This has the opportunity of being something that makes an incredible impact on the wider community, but it only has impact, and it's why we gather here today when we carry it forward. And so I really can't say thank you enough to everybody who just gave so much to make sure that this happened. And so now I'm going to call forward Susan and Steve Berlin. We welcome them to our bima as we have a chance to visit, to hear Susan's story about her mom, and to honor this incredible memory.
Steve, I have it here.
There is not my question sheet. So Steve and Susan, I welcome you. It is wonderful to share the bima with you. And I think the irony is, yes, that the yarmulke that I grabbed today was from Alexander Lawson's bar mitzvah.
Oh my.
I didn't even think about that.
Wow.
So that's where we met.
Yes.
We met at Alexander Lawson's bar mitzvah. He was in 2011. It's 2023. That was like a bar mitzvah ago. And Alex came and said, I've met these people and I want to do a twinning project with a young person who died during the Holocaust. Can I do it, Rabbi? And he did, and he brought this part of the story from your family. And so I welcome the two of you because this is Holocaust. So those things like we're happy to be together, or I'm looking forward to, those aren't normal words in this conversation. And yet I am. To be able to share this story is incredible. Is everybody able to hear me? Okay. And so, hi, Susan and Steve. So what was the story that Alex shared, and how does that kind of start to connect to your family story?
Alex wanted to do something important.
We'll adjust.
Okay. Alex wanted to do something important and meaningful at his bar mitzvah, and we had never heard of the twinning project ever. But what it basically is choosing a child who passed away from the Holocaust before they had a bar mitzvah. And since my mother was in Warsaw, Poland as a child, most of her family, well, all of her family in Poland had perished, including a young boy named Pauli, her first cousin, when he was under 10 years old. So of course he never had his bar mitzvah. So somehow Alex went on the internet and found my mother, because he lived here and we lived in Miami at the time. And so his parents brought him down to Miami to meet my mother, and they spent hours talking, and then he told his parents he would like to honor Pauli Sternberg, was the last name, from Poland, at his bar mitzvah.
And it was really pretty extraordinary. So this is kind of your mom's story.
Yes,
And so your mom was in Warsaw.
yes.
And so, and how old was she? When the Holocaust started in 1939 was when the Nazis invaded Poland. How old was your mom?
She was 10. She was born in 1929, and so she was 10 when the whole thing, Hitler came to Poland.
And I know that there were 3 million Jews in Poland, and almost that entire population was wiped out.
Yes.
And what did your grandparents do in Warsaw?
My grandfather had an import-export business, and my grandmother, amazingly, was a pediatrician. It was very unusual. She learned German when she found out she couldn't study at a Polish medical school, so she learned German and went to Vienna to become a doctor.
And so they were living in Poland, so your mom grew up in Warsaw.
Yes.
Did she ever tell you of stories from when she was little of being in Warsaw?
Yes, she called it an idyllic life. They had a beautiful large apartment. She went to a private school. Her best friend lived next door. Just amazingly, it was a family where the father was a doctor, and he had met my grandmother in medical school. And they weren't Jewish. And they saved my mother's life because they got her false identity of a Polish peasant girl with a new name, a whole new background.
And you had said that so when the Nazis invade, they take over Warsaw in just a matter of weeks, and then all of the Jews get forced into the Warsaw Ghetto, into a
Yes.
very small area in Warsaw.
Yes.
And your grandparents and your mom were in the Warsaw Ghetto.
Yes.
And what can you tell us about that experience in the Warsaw Ghetto?
Well, just before that, this was so amazing, at least terrible. My grandfather saw what was happening, and his company was going to open a branch in New York. So he sent money to New York. He started getting the ball rolling. He got visas. He got tickets on the Queen Mary for October 1st. Hitler came to Warsaw on September 1st. So if it had been the reverse in a month, my mother's family would have been saved. So the ghetto was like a prison. It was surrounded by a wall, barbed wire, vicious guard dogs, and Nazi soldiers. And they had 380,000 Jews packed in to
Two
the
blocks.
small area. 5 families shared a kitchen, a bathroom, and they each had a room to sleep in, each family. Luckily, my grandfather spoke fluent German, so they signed him to be in charge of the gate where products were coming in and out. And when the Jews were becoming exterminated through starvation, disease, and being sent to a concentration camp, he was able to bribe a guard, luckily it was a German guard but not a Nazi, to let my mother walk out. And this family that lived next door, the Popowska family, offered to hide her. So she stayed with them for a while. They got her fake identity. But every time a neighbor came over, she had to hide in the closet because all the neighbors knew she was Jewish, and they didn't know who might report her. So after a while, the family said, this is not doable. You can't spend hours and hours in the closet, and it's getting more and more dangerous. So luckily, Dr. Popowski served patients at different convents in Warsaw. So he asked the Mother Superior in charge of the convents, could he hide my mother? And she risked her life and others to hide my mother. And we later found out she hid 23 other Jewish girls also. They weren't allowed to talk to each other, though, because the Mother Superior was so afraid that if one somehow slipped that she was Jewish, they'd all be rounded up, the children and the nuns, and all killed. So for 2 years, my mother could not speak to the Popowski family, couldn't speak to her father. Her mother, unfortunately, was taken away while visiting a sick child. The Germans forced her to visit children and keep records. They didn't care about her saving them, but they wanted her to keep records of everything. And at the beginning, she did have some medical supplies, but then it ran out. And of course, they weren't replenished. So his family called and said, our son is sick, can you please come over? And she said, I have nothing. I don't have an aspirin. I don't have a Band-Aid. There's nothing I can do. And they begged her to come anyway. So while she went to their house, the Nazis came in and put them all on a train to concentration camp. So that's how my grandmother died.
And so your mom spent 2 years in the convent.
Yes.
And then I know that at some point she ended up into the forest as a partisan for a period of time.
Yes. After 2 years in the convent, she decided that she wanted to fight. She was 12 years old. Amazing. I'm sorry, 14 by that time. She spoke fluent English, so they used her at the beginning as a messenger. And the Russians had promised to send them ammunition and food, but it turned out that was all a lie. The Russians just wanted the Germans and Poles to kill each other. So after a few months, there was nothing left to fight with. So my mother decided she's just going to try to kill Nazis because she figured she's going to die anyway. So she threw Molotov cocktails, she picked up a rifle and somehow learned to shoot. When a comrade was shot, they hadn't died, so a medic came over and asked if anyone would donate blood to give him a transfusion and maybe he would survive. And my mother laid down next to this comrade and gave her blood. But unfortunately, when a priest came to pray with him, he thought it was last rites, and he gave up his will to live, and he died anyway.
And then your mom got captured at one point,
Yes.
but was treated as a regular POW, not realizing she was Jewish.
Correct, because she still wouldn't tell anyone she was Jewish. Even after she left the convent, she was just too afraid. And so when they ran out of ammunition and food, her father, who was still alive, told her to give herself up, because otherwise she would have been shot on the spot. So she thought that once she gave herself up, they would shoot her anyway, so she didn't even take a jacket or a sweater or anything. But it turned out, miraculously, they didn't shoot the prisoners. They sent them to concentration camps. She was in 7 different ones. But luckily, she was treated as a prisoner of war, not as a Jew. But the conditions were, of course, horrendous. They were starving, they were freezing. As they were shipped from one camp to the next, the Polish people came to look at them, she said, like they were animals in a zoo. There was no humanity at all.
And then, so how did your mom ended up in England,
Right,
and then came over to the United States.
right. When the war was over, the British freed Bergen-Belsen, where she was imprisoned, and she had pneumonia, but the British medics saved her. And she knew she had an uncle. Luckily, her father's brother had moved to England before the war. So, but she didn't have his address. She was in a displaced persons camp after the war. And there was a British area, and she would write notes on rocks, since she spoke English, and throw messages back and forth. And one of the soldiers started a conversation with her that way and offered to send a note to his sister in England to try to tell her uncle that she was still alive. And luckily, he was able to do that. So she didn't know the address, but she had read a lot of books. parents were very keen on getting education, even during the war. Somehow, I don't know how he had enough money, but he had tutors for her when she was in the ghetto. And when she was in the convent even, they sent her to private school. I don't know how she had to hide her face when she went on the trolley, so hopefully no one would not recognize her, but she got an education. It was incredible. So,
I think about your mom throwing those rocks over the fence.
yeah,
And one of the stories we always tell about butterflies is pollinators are like malachim, like angels, because in Hebrew and in Torah, an angel is somebody is a being divine or human who makes a special connection. And that's what butterflies do. They go from flower to flower,
Right.
and they pollinate the flowers even as they're drinking the nectar.
right,
And we often talk about those moments where somebody makes a little bit of an effort to make a little bit of a connection that allows something miraculous or powerful or incredible to happen.
Right.
That one soldier, seeing the rock, thinking about your mom, and sent it to his sister, enabled your mother to get out of Europe.
right. And what happened, another person amazingly stepped in. So she made up all these addresses she had read about in books, like Piccadilly Circus, and I don't know what else. And there was such a huge stack of letters at the post office in my uncle's name, which was Dick Perner. He had changed his name from Perlmutter to Perner. The post office put an ad in the paper. Mr. Perner, we have a stack of letters for you. The address was wrong, but luckily they kept them. And my uncle never saw the ad in the paper, but a friend of his did. And the friend called him and said, there's an ad in the paper that you have a lot of mail from a lady named Bianca Perlmutter at a displaced persons camp. And so he went and got the letters, and he was able to bring her to England. Now, there was a charity organization called Hayas that provided funds for children, orphans, and so they were able to send her, but the British would not give her a permanent visa. She loved her uncle so much, and she was so happy there. They said, you're not staying here. You can go to New York or wherever you find a relative in the United States, but you cannot stay in England. She was so heartbroken. So they sent her a family in New York that she didn't know, and they turned out, I'm ashamed to say, to be the most horrible people. They just took the money that Hayes sent for her. They didn't buy her anything. They enrolled her in high school. They tried to marry her off to an Orthodox Jew because there was something called a reverse dowry, where the family that had a daughter or a female that would marry the Orthodox man, the family would get money. So she luckily, thank God, she refused. She said, no, I'm not doing this. She was not raised Orthodox, but her father said the most important thing is to be a good person. And it's funny because I didn't remember that, but I always say that that's the most important thing.
So, so this is your mom's story.
Yeah.
You clearly heard some of this growing up. When did she start sharing the stories with you?
You know, I called my brother to ask him if he remembered, and I don't remember. I just don't know.
And she went, I think you said she went unspoken schools.
Oh, yes, all the time. As an adult, she did so many things that were so painful for her, but she felt that it was the most important thing she could do with the rest of her life. To share what happened, to teach people that you have to speak up for others. You have to take risks. You have to do what's right, and that one person can make a difference. And, you know, the Mother Superior risked herself. The Popowski family risked themselves. So many people helped her to survive. It's just amazing.
And if there was one piece of your mom's legacy that you would like to share today, what do you think, what would it be?
Let me look, because I wrote down a few things.
Well, I can ask in another way. What is something your mom would do that you'd be really proud and say, that's my mom?
Okay. Well, even as a young child in the ghetto, she saw starving orphans that had no family, that were just wandering around the ghetto outside. And somehow, I don't know how this happened, but there was a farmer with a cow in the ghetto. So she collected potato peels from different families and traded it for milk from this farmer, and went out to these children and gave them milk every day. So she started as a young child to try to help. After what she went through, that she saw that these children had a worse life than she did. So that was the beginning of her lifelong way of helping others.
Steve, did you have something you wanted to add? 'Cause-
Yeah, and the thing is that this project, the butterfly, I'm going to read some letters because Susan's mom used to go every year to schools and talk about her experiences. And these are just, I'm not going to read all the full letter, but I just highlighted some areas. And if you don't think that something like this is important or going into schools, you're going to be amazed at what some of these children wrote after she spoke with them.
And it wasn't once a year, she went regularly. She had teachers call her year after year, when can you come speak to my class or to a whole auditorium? And so she suffered the pain of her story over and over and over, but she knew how important it was.
So these letters are from one specific school. It was a Catholic boys' school, high school. And this one boy wrote, "Before you came, I didn't feel that's feeling sorry for me, that the Jewish people, feeling sorry for the Jewish people. But now knowing what they went through, I will never make an anti-Semitic comment again. Your speech has changed the way I look at the people of the Jewish religion. Once again, thank you. Keep on coming to the school because kids need to know what happened." Here's another one. "I'm thankful because you taught me something. You taught me that just standing and letting things happen doesn't do anything. I learned that standing up to things and stopping them is the right thing to do. Something that I think was really hard for me to get was how you sacrificed yourself to helping other children. It was part of you talking when you were saying how you used to get potato peels and give them to the farmer for milk. Your story has educated and shown people that some people don't get life that easy, and that if no one pays attention to things like this, it can happen again." Just a couple more. I learned not to take my life for granted because yours and some people's are so much worse than mine. I hope nothing like the Holocaust will happen ever again. I apologize for anyone who is anti-Semitic towards you. So, and it just goes on and on. So this kind of event and visiting the schools, it can change lives and people's views. So spread the word.
Now, Alex wrote a beautiful, you have that there,
Yeah.
Sooner? Alex Lawson,
bar
that had
mitzvah
his
one.
bar mitzvah here.
He wrote an essay, and there's one part that he quoted Rabbi Gilson, which is part of our prayer book. And it says, "So long as we live, they too shall live, for they are now part of us as we remember them."
And Susan, did your mom ever go back to Europe?
She did, she went to Poland. She went to visit her friend, and who lived until last year. The friend survived. And actually, Steve and I are going to see the friend's daughter in Connecticut next month. We've stayed in touch with her. And I didn't go with her. I was too afraid. Very emotional person, and Unfortunately, I'm sorry to say that she's felt there was still a lot of anti-Semitism in Poland. You know, and I'm sure you know that there's Holocaust deniers that said it never happened. And then I found a page, the cover of the New York Times, that she had copied from the middle of the war. The whole front page is full of articles blaming the Jews that they're holding up the peace process with Hitler. And I don't know, maybe 5 or 7 articles. Every single one, the headline was anti-Jewish in the front. So,
Hard world we can live in.
yeah. So when you think about how could people have not helped to stop this sooner, because all the propaganda was telling people all lies.
So for Susan and for Steve, thank you so much for being here, for sharing that story. And I have for you Temple Beth Shalom pomegranate puckers. So you have to realize when a young person becomes bar or bat mitzvah, the tradition is to throw candy at them. Instead of throwing candy, we now hand out candy because we're a little more civilized. We also have glass and flesh that is up on the bima, but these are pomegranate candies. And pomegranates are auspicious in Judaism because we are told that our acts of goodness and righteousness are supposed to be as plentiful as the seeds in a pomegranate. And so I offer these to you. This is a never-ending bag. So when it is empty, you can always get free refills here at Temple Beth Shalom. So Susan, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming. It really means a lot.
And now I invite forward Clara McCarthy to come and share her story. And as Clara comes forward, come on up. My haircut was from Clara. She works at Lorenzo's Hair Salon and does an amazing job. She also is a wonderful person at the Theater Guild. And so if you would like the best of drama in Vero Beach, the Theater Guild. So, and Clara, I know as you're sitting and hearing Susan share that story, you and I looked at each other because she said her mother was liberated from Bergen-Belsen.
Yeah.
You and I both had that thought. It was like, I wonder if you were there at the same time.
No,
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 because you weren't there at the end of the war.
no, I wasn't.
So, and Clara, you have been more hesitant in sharing your story, understandably, because what an incredible story it is. And yet, of the 20 years I've been here, you always find a way of popping up and giving your ruach and koach, your spirit and strength. And so I am so appreciative that you're here today to share some of your story with us.
Thank you.
So Susan's telling the story of her mom in Warsaw. You grew up in Amsterdam.
I was born and raised in Amsterdam, yes.
And you still know all the good cheese and chocolate spots.
Oh, yeah.
And so how long were you in you tell us a little bit about your growing up in Amsterdam.
Okay. I was born in the center of Amsterdam, Pretoria Straat, and I had a wonderful, wonderful childhood. My mother used to take us to the park every day, but in those days, we had to completely dress up with the hat and the coat and the gloves and everything. And those were the most joyful times of my life until the war broke out. We were living in a flat above a grocery store. And we were very, very, when my mother started seeing the times changing, and when we were told that we had to wear the Jewish star on every piece of our clothing, I was very curious, and I said, Mom, why are we doing this in all the clothes? And she said, we have been chosen to be very, very special people. And so in order for us to be special, we're going to, sew the Jewish star on every piece of our clothing. And my grandmother and my grandfather lived with us too. And so between my mom and my grandmother, they were sewing the stars on every bit, underwear, dresses, no matter what you had, coats, you had to have a Jewish star on that part. And for a while, everything went pretty well. We kept pretty well hidden. And one day, because of the grocery store, Mom used to send us downstairs, get a bottle of milk, or get some cheese or eggs or whatever. And one day, my brother, who was a little bit younger than me, went downstairs to collect some bread. She had to buy some bread for us. And while he was down there, a German soldier came in to the same grocery store. And he said, "Where are you from, little boy?" And my brother said, "Upstairs." Needless to say, a week later, we were arrested. We were told to pack one suitcase. We were taken downstairs, my mother, my grandmother, my grandfather, me, and my brother, and my father. And we were all put into big cattle cars and taken to a center called Westerbork. Westerbork was a liberation camp for the German Jews that fled to Holland. And then when the Germans took it over, it became a concentration camp, a travel camp to go from one concentration camp to the other. And that's where we were for 6 months, under horrible conditions, but a lot better than other camps that were there. While we were there, every day, a German soldier would come with a list of names to ask people to come forward. They were then escorted and taken to different concentration camps. And one day my mother was laying on the bed, and we would share. We'd had 2 bunks for all 5 of us, and we shared it. And we had very little food too, but we shared what we possibly could. And one day my mother woke up in the middle of the night, and she grabbed a hold of me and she said, "Your father's next." And I said, "What do you mean, Mom?" I was 7 years old at that time. And she said, "I had a vision that Daddy was on the next transport." And sure enough, the next day he was taken away and he was sent to Auschwitz. Needless to say, he never came back. Much as we looked and tried to find out where he was after the war, we found out about 10 years later that he went to Auschwitz. He lasted about 6 months in a labor camp, and then he was sent to the gas chambers, and that's where he ended up. Meanwhile, we were then, about 6 months later, we were sent to a camp called Bergen-Belsen, which was not a camp where you had the gas chambers, but it was what they called a political camp. And there were about 10 or 15 different camps with different people doing, one was a political camp, one was just for the Jews, and then there were other camps that I don't even remember. We went there, and the way I remember it now in my vision as looking down at the camp and being put in there. We took our suitcases, which were promptly destroyed after we got off the train, and we went into different barracks. And my father had died prior to that in Westerbork. My grandmother was sent to one camp, and my mom and my brother and myself were sent to another camp. And my mother was pregnant at the time, which I was unaware of. And we went into different barracks, and we were assorted, we were assigned the bunks, which was a bunk with 4 slats of wood where all of us slept on one bunk. There was no food to speak of. We had food maybe one day a week, once a day, and it was like a sloppy type of soup that you had to line up, and you were fed once a day, and that was it. And then we went out to the labor camps, but we were too young, so we were spared going into the fields to work.
I think you said you tried to be at the end of the line.
Yeah,
Because at the end of the line was when you got to the bottom of the soup bowl where you might get a piece of meat or more vegetables.
yes, yes. So at the very, very end of the line, my brother and I, my mother at that time was quite pregnant and very sick. She had started to contact typhoid fever. I mean, the conditions were horrible. We did not have bathrooms. We had horse troughs that they put out in the field with a couple of taps so we could wash ourselves. Maybe once a day we were allowed to wash ourselves in ice cold water. Every day we were what they call standing to appel. We had the German soldiers that would push us out into the open, and it was in the wintertime, below 0 temperatures, in the clothes that we had. We had no change of clothes. We had no way to keep ourselves clean. And having to go to the bathroom, all you could do, our people, the people that were prisoners, had to dig holes into the ground. And they had a big plank of wood, about 100 feet long, and we had to drill holes in it. And that's how we went to the bathroom. There was no sanitation, and typhoid became rampant. It's just,
And no privacy.
oh, it was definitely no privacy. You know, you had to go to the bathroom with 100 other people, you know, and things became unbelievably bad. We were beaten. I was trying, when my sister was born, and I don't remember how she was born. My mom just disappeared, and it was just my brother and myself, and the next thing there was this little baby. And she was born in April, when it was getting a little bit warmer. And of course, anytime that my mother would try to breastfeed, they knocked my sister out of her hands so that she couldn't eat. So I started to become very, very smart. I became a wonderful thief. I was about 8 years old at that time, and I started to, how can I explain it? I would sit and watch. I didn't realize that a baby can't eat food. So I would sit and I would watch people dying. And when they died, I would be right there, and I would steal the food from underneath their heads and take it to my sister and try to feed her. It didn't work. It didn't work. So I did that. I became really good at that. And my brother and I became very adept at watching when people died. My brother would take one leg, I would take the other, and we would drag them out of the camp and into wheelbarrows. And we would have to put them into the wheelbarrow, and then one of the adults would take the wheelbarrow, take it down to the mass graves, and just turn them upside down and put the people in the mass graves. And that was basically what our life was about. I was very young, but you grow very, very quickly, because I remember, I can still hear it in my head, when we tried to pull the people that were dead out of the barracks, you'd hear their heads clunking. Oh,
Even when we were walking into the building and the door closed behind you, you jumped.
yes.
And Claire, how long were you in Bergen-Belsen?
I was in Bergen-Belsen for 3 years.
And I know it was kind of extraordinary because Marion Lazan is part of our community. Her son, David, has been a urologist here in town for a number of years. Their children all grew up here, and she was talking about her book, Four Perfect Pebbles.
Yes.
And you had a chance to visit a little bit with Marion, and we opened up Four Perfect Pebbles as you were telling me your story about being in Amsterdam and Westerbork and Bergen-Belsen. It's like, that's very much Marion's story. And we opened up Four Perfect Pebbles, and we actually found, of all things, found your family on the same page as Marion's family in the copy of the transit records that were in Four Perfect Pebbles.
Right.
Talk about a small world.
Yeah, it was.
And so 3 years in Bergen-Belsen, and then
Yes.
what, and where did you go after that?
After Bergen-Belsen, we were put on a train because it was coming toward the end of the war, and we were put on a train going to the gas chambers in Treblinka and in Sobibor and in all the other places that carried, because they saw that things were happening. Too many people were still alive, too many Jews were still alive, and they didn't want to have anyone left alive so that they could tell the story. And so we all went on different trains. Lucky for us, in a way, I was put on a transport train that got lost. Train 222. The guy did not know where he was going, and we were wandering around Germany. And every day, because it was in a German troop train, the Allies would bomb us every single day. And one day, my mother used to throw herself on top of us. And one day we were laying in a field, and we were being shot at. And my mother was on top of both of us. And one bullet went flying right by my brother's ear. And he picked it up afterwards, and he had it for years and years and years, till he finally got rid of it. When the bombing stopped, and the Germans told us to get back on the train, my mother stood up, and right in front of her, because she used to speak Dutch, English, and German, right in front of her, there was a sign that said, "Stay out of this field," in German, "Stay out of this field, live minefield." Oh. That's where we were. That's where we were.
And so what, eventually the train was liberated.
Yes, eventually we were on the train for 12 days under the worst conditions you could possibly imagine. No sanitation. If anybody had to go to the bathroom, you went to the bathroom in the cabinet that you were. And about the 12th day, there was a lot of yelling and shouting and screaming going on. And people were just jumping all over the place. And I stood up, and my brother stood up, and we looked out the window, and it was like a movie. There was a massive dust and people on horseback, and they were coming toward the train. And they stopped the train, and what it was the Russian Cossacks. And they liberated the train, and they took us to a town called Trovich, which was a German town where most people had fled because they were Germans, but they left a lot of food behind because things were getting very, very out of hand. The Russians had taken over this town, and they had got rid of most of the Germans, those that they didn't kill. And so we ended up in Trovich, and we ended up for the first time in 3.5 years in a bed, in a real bed, with an eiderdown and sheets and stuff. And my brother and I went upstairs, and we went onto the bed, and a Russian soldier came to the room and pointed his gun at me. And he was going to shoot me. And my brother said, "No, no, no, sister, she's my sister." He said that in Dutch. But I was blonde and very blue-eyed. And so they thought I was a German, and they were going to kill me. And this stood for about half an hour. my brother saying no, me scared to death, and this Russian with a gun getting closer and closer to my face. And finally, he realized that my brother, who was very dark, brown-eyed, was holding me and saying, "Zuster, zuster, my sister." And he finally walked away.
I'm guessing that if you were 8, 9, 10, that you didn't realize exactly where you were.
I did not.
And so how did you find out where you had been and this different information about the train and...
After the war, when we were liberated, that's when I found out where we were. I knew where we were in Belsen. My grandmother, may she rest in peace, she was in a different place in the camp, a different, I can't even remember what to call it, a barracks. And being very kosher, very stubborn, she went up to one of the German soldiers and she spat in his face because he started beating her. And she spat in his face, and, you know, I would imagine like some of the people do today in Russia, where in the Ukraine, where these older people are standing up and fighting for their rights. And my grandmother did that. And he just stood there. When she spat in his face, he took out his gun and shot him and killed her. I was right there to see it, because she was in a different barracks. And what else can I say? My little sister, Millie, she was 11 years old. She was about 2 days from her birthday.
11 months.
11 months old, I'm sorry. She was 11 months old, and because I could not find food and my mother couldn't breastfeed her anymore, she did die. And when she died in my arms. And instead of putting her in the wheelbarrow, I carried her all the way to where the mass graves were. And I went down and I laid her down. Yeah. Yeah, there was a time. In our barracks, we had one stove for everything. And at one time, we used to take the slats from our bunks to put them into the stove to keep us warm, but that ran out after a while. And I went to get my sister's some food, not knowing that she couldn't eat, she could only drink. And a German soldier, or the woman who was running that particular barracks, her name was Irma Grisa. She was a horrible, horrible, vicious woman who would beat people up and you know, just rip them to part if they didn't do what she wanted. And she saw me stealing the food, and she grabbed a hold of me, and with the butt of her rifle, she butted my mouth, and I lost all my teeth on the bottom. And then she took my hand and put it up against the stove and burned it to teach me not to steal.
And yet you survived.
I did.
And you went from Trovich, and how did you end up in England?
Well, my mum was English, my father was Dutch, and at the beginning of the war, they decided to get a divorce so that she could maintain her British citizenship and maybe save our lives, you know, and not have to go to the camps, but that was all for nothing. And so when the war ended, and because she was British, that's how we ended up going with a transport, a misplaced persons camp. We were there for about 3 months, and the Red Cross sent all kinds of survivors lists out to the general public and to the general, you know, England, Holland, France, Denmark, and her half-sister saw our names on the survivors lists, and she sent for us, and that's how we ended up going to England.
And your brother Maurice is still there.
My brother lives there. He's a very famous sculptor, and he wrote a book 2 years ago.
This is Clara's brother, Maurice. This is his book, The Art of Survival. And so actually, if you go onto YouTube, you can actually see some of his interviews as well.
Yeah.
And he is, and this is not necessarily just about his story of survival, but really how art became his way of recovering
Yeah.
and making his life after their experiences.
Most of his beautiful horses' heads are as a memorial to the Russians who came in on their horses and saved our train. And he just absolutely was mesmerized by the magnificence of their horses. And when he became a sculptor, that's one of the first things that he sculpted. So.
And I know that one of our conversations we said is, and people have said to you, how do you remember those things? And your answer is always, how do you forget?
How do you forget? One day you're having a wonderful time with your mother. You're going to the park and you're having a wonderful day. And the next day you're not allowed out. And you're told you can't do this and you can't do that. And you're wearing a star and you wonder why. And trying to survive throughout the 2 concentration camps that we were in made you grow up real quick, very, very quick. My mother came down with typhoid at one point in Belsen, and she was dying. And I guess I was the strongest one of what was left of us. And I was dragging her on my back from one place to the other, whether she had to go to the bathroom or whether we tried to wash her on the one trough that they had for everyone. And I dragged her with me wherever I could go. So yeah, how do you forget? You become very, very aware of what's going on in your life at that time, because it changes overnight.
And your mom survived,
She did,
and you all made it to England.
yes.
And how old was your mom when she passed away?
My mother was 70 when she passed away. She never, ever spoke about it. I know nothing about my family. I do know that out of 25 people in my immediate family, 20 of them perished. They went to, some of them went to Auschwitz, and the rest went to Birkenau, which is the
Death
sister
camp.
camp to Auschwitz. So I lost, other than, I think, my one uncle who married out of his religion was the only one that survived. And my father, at the beginning of the war, my father and his 2 brothers, the 2 brothers had had a gas station and a repair shop. And my father went out all through Holland selling parts that they used to have for cars and tires and stuff like that. When the Germans came, they came to my uncle's place and they said, you will take care of our trolleys and our cars on one condition. You have to tell us where your brother and the family are, because we were in hiding at that time. And they said, well, we really don't know where they're hiding. And they said, well, fine, we'll find out sooner or later where they're hiding. If you do not tell us, we will take your family and we will send them to Auschwitz. If you do tell us, we will spare you. So it was a very, very difficult situation for my uncle, the one uncle. And he finally, after about 3 weeks of debating whether he should tell where we were hiding, he told them. They went to Auschwitz and they all died. And that's when we were caught. I know I'm telling it all backwards,
No, but, we were just, my family had the chance to go to Europe, and we were in the Anne Frank house, and they had a map of Amsterdam, and they had a dot for every 10 Jews, and you could see the population density of Jews all around Amsterdam, because the Germans were going around doing that very thing, trying to find everybody.
Yeah.
And then the incredible piece was 3 days after we got back from Europe, finishing in Amsterdam, a knock at the door, and who's there but Belisarius, your nephew,
Yeah.
and his fiance, and we started talking about Amsterdam. Here I am coming back from our visit to be in that place and all of those memories from my family,
Yeah.
and I got that incredible window and get a chance to visit with your nephew.
Yeah, he was.
So, Clara, thank you so much for sharing. I know that. She's worried that she didn't do an amazing job. And so, Clara, I hope you will stay with us. We're gonna, when we walk out, if you would put this butterfly on the tree.
Absolutely.
And of course, the most important part of this is pomegranate puckers that really can't say thank you enough. Thank you. As and we are going to go out in just a few minutes. We're going to take a moment to do some prayer before we go outside. One of the things that I do want to share with you as we were talking with the superintendent about Holocaust education of our school district, we pointed out about the book, I Never Saw Another Butterfly, which is the basis of the Butterfly Project. And you'll hear the butterfly song, the last butterfly, you have the words. It was written by a young man named Pavel Friedman in Terezin. There were 15,000 children who went through Terezin. Only about 100 of them survived. There were 16,000 kids in the Indian River County School District. Think about that for a moment. Why do we have Pavel Friedman? Why do we know his name? Why do we have his poem? Why do we have all of those poems? Because adults that were there that were taking care of those children, they didn't know what was going to happen to the children, and they saved that artwork and that poetry and that writing, so there was some record, there was some weight of their presence here in this world, because they didn't have control over their lives. Why do we have Anne Frank's diary? Because Miette, the one who was helping the family, saved the diary, gave it to Otto, and Otto shared it with us. The 8 people in the secret annex, only Otto Frank survived. So what we hear today, as we're hearing from Clara, as we heard from Susan, are just a fraction, because so many died. And that's why we're here, to honor and to remember, but also, as Clara is such an amazing example, how do we continue to move forward and say we don't want the world to be like that? And Clara, you are amazing, because the way you give smiles, and you don't think you smile, and you don't know that you share your story. She does all of those things with such love and care, and isn't it incumbent on us, as we are going to stop and remember to also find ways to carry life forward. And so I invite you